also talk about some of the limitations we came across and how perhaps we could overcome some of those as well. So that's basically what I'll work through today, and I'll start by looking at the context. For those of you who aren't familiar with Business 2257, it is a second-year honors level course. All students enrolled in BMOS modules are required to take this course, as well as any students who are hoping to gain entry to IB's HBA program. So we get a very wide range of students. We do get some who have a finance accounting interest, but we also get a large number, even within MOS, who are not interested in the finance accounting side, or of course students from multiple disciplines who are essentially being forced to take this course. So that's always a nice way to start September. I know you're all here because we make you be here. Welcome. In the years that we were doing this project, at the time there were 23 sections of the course across campus, all the affiliate colleges as well as main campus, approximately 1,600 students in the course. The way we approach Business 2257 is it's very much a self-learning in terms of the background material, and we like to spend our time in class actually working through case studies. Certainly in the first term there's a little bit of let's just make sure everyone understands the material, but we certainly don't have time to do full robust lectures with lots of examples. We expect students to do that ahead of time, which is where this project kind of came out of, because at the time the only supports that students had were the textbook readings and summary PowerPoint slides, which were just that, summaries of essentially what they would have read in the textbook. And overwhelmingly students indicated that they didn't feel that this was enough to get them prepared for the in-class sessions where we were asking them to actually apply what they should already know, and many of them said, but I still don't know that, so how can I apply it? So that's what we were trying to overcome. Some of you, when you think of accounting, may already start to get a little bit queasy in the stomach. Again, a lot of students come into the course with some anxiety. Some perhaps warranted, but a lot of it is urban legends and myths that get passed from year to year, and everyone kind of dreads taking this Business 2257 course. There is some negative perception about accounting in general. There is research into just that. And in fact, looking at course evaluations, there's a number of students who, as their initial enthusiasm level for the course, they're asked to indicate, it's actually not very high. Most of them, again, feel that they're having to do this, not necessarily wanting to do this course. And so this notion of a new language and the general uncertainty we wanted to try to overcome. I won't go too much into this next section, but there's a lot of literature about how you can incorporate technology into the classroom and different ways that you can take what's on paper and somehow animate it for students. We chose to do narrated PowerPoints. Now, part of this was because we really, in these beginning years of this project, were somewhat limited. I will, and this will come in some learnings later on as well, but Business 2257, because it's across campus, there is a central OWL website, which, although obviously I can do stuff on, is largely maintained by an on-campus course coordinator. And so we were somewhat limited into how much they'd kind of let us do, if you will, because this was viewed as not mandatory, this was an add-on, and so they didn't want us to deviate too much from the course as it stood. So obviously part of what we were wanting to do is take into account different learning styles. Not everyone can read an accounting textbook chapter and understand it. Some people need more visual, auditory, etc. And then there's also a lot of literature in terms of the kind of outcomes you can expect from incorporating technology into the classroom. and how it can help students as they go through their learning. So that was part of what framed all of this as well. So here's what we did. We first wanted to figure out how students were currently using these summary PowerPoint slides that we call topic slides. So we surveyed students. We conducted an online survey. We had 471 students reply to the survey, a response rate of 30.6% in that year. Mainly, we wanted to know how they were using the topic slides, how useful they perceived them to be, as well, was there an appetite or an interest in digitizing these slides? I'll let the cat out of the bag. They seem to want them to be digitized, so we did, in that summer, undertake to digitize all of the lectures. Now, we focused on the first term, because that's where more of the technical material is, and we thought that that's where most of the anxiety was coming from. We, again, took the existing PowerPoints, narrated them. We posted them at the time it was WebCT, and it was put in a separate audio visual files under topic slides. I'm going to give you a little example. I've taken just 1 minute out of one of these. These range from, most of them were about in the 5 to 10 minute range, but there were a couple that were over half an hour long, which again is another learning we got out of this. But here's a little example. Hopefully the audio will work.
Welcome to the business.
Technology. It's thinking.
There's 257 topic slides covering Introduction to T Account. In our course, we will be using T accounts as our way of recording transactions onto the accounting record. For those of you who may have studied accounting in the past, you were likely exposed to journal entries. When using journal entries, we require 2 steps to properly update our accounting records: the journal entry itself, as well as the subsequent posting of the individual elements of the journal entry to the appropriate ledgers. Through the use of T accounts, we are able to accomplish both of these steps in one. As the name suggests, a T account is shaped like a T and is comprised of 3 basic elements: a title along the top, a left side, referred to as the debit side, and a right side, referred to as the credit side. Regardless of the specific account in question, all T accounts have the same basic structure.
And that's all I'll subject you to, as it's not supposed to pop back and forth. That's always the fun of it. I joked with my students and said, so 3 hours of listening to me talk a week isn't enough. Now you can listen to me on the bus, at the gym. These were available both in MP3 and MP4. So what I showed you is the MP4 that had the visual with the audio. You could also just download the audio, like a podcast. And so we, again, undertook to digitize all of those lectures. I'm going to lower the volume so there's a little hum here. And we made those available to students in that next year. We then, at the end of that second year, conducted another survey. Now, obviously, these were different students, although some of them might have been the same student from one year to the next. But for the most part, they were a different cohort. And we now wanted to figure out how were they using these, were they using them, again, how useful they perceived them, etc. Again, we had a quite high response rate, 356 students, 22% of the cohort that year. So I'm going to take you through some of what we found in terms of how they embraced this technology. In the first phase, before we digitized, what we were finding is overwhelmingly, and my apologies if that's a little small, but overwhelmingly students were using these summary PowerPoints mainly to get ready for exams. And what we weren't so happy to see is that while they were using them for class, that wasn't what they mainly saw the value of. And of course, that's what we saw the value of them for, is do these before class so you can come to class ready to apply it. The other thing we found is, and it goes from very useful down to not useful at all. Again, we mainly found that students were saying they were quite useful to help them for exams. Bless you, not as useful for the preparation for class. Finally, when asked, would you use these if they were available in a kind of digital format that you could download, 60% of that first phase cohort said that yes, they would be either likely or extremely likely to download them. So that gave us the push to go ahead. Do that, it was quite an undertaking between Melissa and I to digitize all of those lectures. We opted to use, at the time, WebCT had the ability within it to create these digitized lectures. So that's the technology we used to do that. So then we went to phase 2, and here's where our hard work perhaps didn't pay off as much as we had hoped. We asked the phase 2 students, what did you use this past year to get you ready for the course? Overwhelmingly, 80% were still using the PowerPoint slides that were there the year before, which we weren't surprised that they made the biggest chunk of the pie. We had really hoped that this 16% would have been bigger. We absolutely did not go into this thinking everyone's just going to want to listen to Melissa and I and not look at the PowerPoints. That would have been naive and not really realistic. But we had hoped that more people would have used, at least at some point, a combination of the two, and we didn't see that as much. So again, we wanted to figure out why were they using certain ones, why weren't they using others. So we looked at students who use PDF, and that would include all the PDF onlys as well as the combo group. So we wanted to see, is there a difference between how this group is using PDF versus this group? And really there wasn't a huge difference, although one thing I would say, and my colleagues in psychology might be able to help me see if any of these differences are statistically significant. But one thing we did notice is that in terms of people who used a combination, they seem to use PDFs a little more evenly in terms of why they were using them. Whereas we still found the PDF only seemed to be focusing towards exam and not the day-to-day coursework. In terms of usefulness, again, they overwhelmingly, and this was for the combo group, we asked, why did you use PDF versus audiovisual? They still like the PDF for getting ready for exams. And really, we didn't see them using the audiovisual as much as we would have hoped for preparing for class, which was unfortunate. When we asked why they didn't use the audiovisual, so this would have been the PDF only group that we asked, hey, why didn't you use the other? If this is true, this makes me happy. They understood the material without needing to look at it, and very well, that could be the case. That was the most answered. What we were a little unhappy about seeing is that many didn't even know that they existed. So again, this came to some of the learning of how to incorporate this. Melissa and I had a theory that maybe we natted on our students enough to go on and do these, that we might have influenced some of it. Sure enough, we did find that. When we broke down the students from Brescia and Huron, while they still mainly used the PDF only, the combo group was fairly significant. So our students were going and doing a combination. At King's and Maine, where they didn't have the professors or the instructors natting at them all the time, much different picture, where overwhelmingly, in both cases, it turned out to be 86% still just went to the PDF only. So I think if there's one takeaway you can maybe go away with today, that is maybe sometimes our students do listen to us, and if we bug them enough, they'll actually do what we ask them to do. So on reflection, here's what Melissa and I found. Certainly a challenge in this project was instructor support and influence. I think we saw that the instructors did have an influence on how some of these more novel lectures were being used. The centrally managed website was problematic, and so we didn't get a good chance to really highlight them. Interestingly, and we didn't survey students a third year, but after that initial run, when we saw that a lot of students said they didn't know it existed, we actually pushed to have them a bit more visible on the WebCT site the next year, where students didn't have to go to a separate AV folder. When they went to topic slides, the first one was the PDF, the MP3 underneath it, the MP4 underneath that. So we did try to make it more visible. Unfortunately, we didn't find out whether that helped or not. What we learned is you need to build the awareness and visibility. You need it to be easy for students to access these things. You need to show them and tell them the value. It was a relatively new tool, and so the more easy it was to get at, the better. Another challenge is it was voluntary. We did not make students go and listen to these or watch these. It was up to them. And so I think if to do this again, we would integrate it a little bit better, I think, into the course, maybe combine it with online quizzes or something else that after you've listened to this or watched this, answer these questions. There's a lot of literature that says that if you just leave it to them to do, they don't always do it. If you do something that encourages them to do it, then they tend to be more likely to actually use that tool. And finally, there were certainly technological and content limitations. Again, we had to use the PowerPoints, and Melissa and I, were not overly tech savvy. So the fact that we could make those, we felt pretty proud about. So I think a learning from that as well is in the intervening years, I mean, there's all sorts of different ways that you could take a lecture and present it to students ahead of time so that, again, they have the content, then they can come to class and apply it. So even YouTube channels, physically going through some of it. I think also what would have helped is if we could have cut the chunk it down a bit and allow students to access only parts of it. So one lecture might be 50 slides. That would be one continuous MP3 or MP4. So if a student really only had trouble with a certain part of that topic, they're having to listen and fast forward and try to get to where they need to be. And so somewhere where you can either use this as maybe examples. So, we're not going to do the lecture, but here's where we're going to take you through some examples. Something where it's different. I think that was another shortcoming. And again, part of it was the management of the course didn't allow us to get too creative. So I would say that if you were wanting to digitize lectures or material, I would suppose that most of you in the room wouldn't have as much limitations on you because your OWL page is your OWL page. And you can set it up how you like, put things out there how you like. We were a little more limited in that it's a joint site. So that's a little overview of the project and some of what we found, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.